think this. Okay, you record the session. Yes.
You can share your screen.
Good. I share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sure.
Good, perfect. And as you see, I extended the title a little bit by basic principles of cognitive search and insight problem solving, and I put a question mark behind this. Good, let's start with a little fact check and a summary of basic assumptions and different terms that we face. One assumption is that search is a core feature of cognition. I think we will agree with this assumption coming from the problem space theory, Newell and Simon. Then, yeah, we rely on this idea that problem solving is search. And the second assumption is interesting because it says that external and internal search processes show structural similarities and often similar solutions. I think that's interesting, and I will show you a few examples where we hopefully can learn from external search processes how internal search processes might be created or can be operationalized. Yeah, two processes. The first one is exploiting and exploiting new known opportunities. That means you have already a search space, and within the search space you try to select candidate solutions or select certain solutions to a problem. And the second thing is that you start with an exploration phase, exploring new or better opportunities. And I think within problem solving, and this might be an open question, how restructuring kicks in this dynamic of exploring new situations and exploiting situations. That will be discussed later on, hopefully. There are different terms in different domains that might mean similar things. In decision making, we have this exploration, exploitation terms. In visual attention, we often speak about focused or diffuse search processes. In foraging, we have intensive or extensive search processes, and in memory, within the memory research, we have local or global search processes. In artificial intelligence, you find different terms, depth first or breadth first, algorithms, and they often have to do with adaptation on different environments or landscapes. A nice quote from Cohn et al. States that several studies have now shown that both humans and other animals dynamically update their estimates of rewards associated with specific courses of action and abandon actions that are deemed to be diminishing in value in search of others that may be more rewarding. I think this is a nice quotation because it shows a little bit, or it gives us a first hunch how the inner mesh, the inner working of the system and the thresholds of the system can be assumed in a way. That means when is the system changing from an exploitation into an exploration phase? What are the triggers or the driving forces that let us start to explore, and why there are, when you look at problem solving, I think we studied the 9-dot problem, for example, very extensively. And we often found that a lot of people stuck within a certain solution strategy until the entire time of the experiment, until the upper time limit is reached. And that means they are not able to get out of this mental set and change into a new exploration phase. And it would be very, very interesting if we could find out, or if we have triggers or hunches or clues that helps to change between these two search processes. Yeah, let us start with foraging. That means in the animal literature, you can imagine you have an environment. In this environment, you have food, you have different patches, and the animals are, for example, starting at this orange patch and foraging for food. And after a while, they exploited the patch and consumed a lot of the available food. And then the question is, what is a good point in time to change to another patch? And when I have full knowledge, and that's the first problem of the theory, when I have full knowledge about the environment, then I should know after which amount of time, after which amount of food I should change to another patch, and I can determine after which time I have to change to another patch, and how costly is the change from one patch to another. It's here you see theta as another parameter that goes into the model. As I said before, this makes only sense if I have full knowledge about the environment. Without this full knowledge, it becomes more complicated to have a good criterion that says, now I have to change. If there is a lot of food in the environment available, then I can explore very early. If there is not enough food, then I have to exploit at the same patch much more longer. And this were the first studies on exploration and exploitation to look at the dynamics when agents or animals should go from the exploitation phase into the exploration phase. And whether it is possible to come up with a computational model that helps us to show the driving forces and model the different parameters and aspects that drive this behavior. In the cognitive domain, there is a lot of research on visual attention and local exploration and exploitation strategies, as you can see here. For example, you have an experiment with a lot of letters. You have a target letter, for example, an F, and you have a lot of distractors within this screen. And you have a very salient distractor here, the letter T, and the salient distractor at the beginning grab your attention. And exploitation means in this sense that you look at the letter, and if it is the target letter, okay. If not, you have to explore locally what is the next letter. And there, of course, are different strategies and different mechanisms. One supposed mechanism is for example, inhibition of return. That means when I visit a letter, it is more probably to go to another letter and not to go back to this letter. In practice or in the data, we find it's more a mixed model. There is no full inhibition of return when you look at the data, but inhibition of return helps more or less to sculpt the search space in a certain direction. And if you have enough time, you can use different search strategies. For example, here you can start at the left upper corner, and then you go like reading from left to right, from right to left, and searching the entire search space until you have found the target letter. Of course, this is a very costly strategy, but at the end, it should be successful. Another very interesting study which investigates the priming effects of different search strategies on the production of letter strings is shown here, was introduced by Hills and colleagues. And it starts with two different conditions. In the first condition, so-called clustered condition, you have these clusters. You see here the black patches of information, and the task of the participants was to find these patches. Yeah, you have to imagine these patches are hidden. You only see a white screen. You press at the screen, and after a while you find a first positive response, and then people realize, okay, this is a patch. I'm looking locally in the environment. I exploit more or less the local environment and find the supposed clusters. In the second condition, in the diffuse condition, you see here you have no clusters, you have scrambled dots, and that means you explore through the entire field and you find a more diffuse search pattern. And people either start with this clustered search behavior, this external search behavior, or with this diffuse external search behavior. You can say this is more the exploitation, this is the exploration. And then they looked whether this induced search behavior has any influence or affects the production of letter strings. That means you have a letter set, as you can see here, N, S, B, D, O, E, and the participants were asked to produce as many English words as possible. And here you see a very nice representation of the data. And that means the bigger such a patch, the more people found the solution. As you see, a lot of people found bone, a lot of people found done, and the arrows and the thickness of the arrows show you how many people show this transient between done and bone. And as you also see is when you look at the bigram similarities, that people often go from words that are very similar, done and bone, change only the first letter. Yeah. This is one thing. The other thing is when you categorize the solutions and the search behavior in this letter condition by the priming condition, then you find that the clustered participants stuck much longer in a letter set than in the diffuse condition. Yeah, and I think this might be an interesting further manipulation of Arthur's paradigm. As you know, Arthur is interested in these compound associates and had the idea that with different clues, we can maybe investigate the interplay of spreading activation and constraining search space. And maybe a further manipulation could be that we induce different search strategies, and these different search strategies restrict more or less the search space. Good. Another domain within decision making is to investigate exploration, exploitation with one-armed bandits. That means you have a bandit. When you pull the lever, then you get a reward. First of all, you have these 4 different bandits here. First of all, you have to find out which bandit produces the maximum reward. And secondly, this is important, this is not a stationary reward. Always when you get reward, then the amount of reward is decreased in the next trial. That means after a while, you have to switch to another bandit. And this is a nice paradigm to play a little bit around with thresholds and look at the search behavior that people apply on this problem. And finally, we all are interested in insight problem solving and in some sense in creativity. And there is a very, very nice study introduced by Hart and colleagues, and they investigated creative foraging, and they introduced a new paradigm. And in this new paradigm, you see this 10 squares, these 10 connected squares, and the task of the participants was to produce as many as possible different shapes from this given 10 squares, and these 10 squares have to be connected. And now elegantly, they looked at these different phases, exploration and exploitation, by what figures are people producing. And here, for example, you see in the first exploitation phase, a participant produces always digits, 7, 6, 9. After exploiting this, this category again and again, she starts with an exploration phase, and after this exploration phase, she enters a second exploitation phase with rectangular figures. And again, she produced different rectangular figures. And so they had a very nice criterion to demarcate different phases of exploitation and exploration by different categories. Yeah. Here you have another figure where you can see the categories like English letter, digits, Hebrew letters, airplanes, and the figure also shows how many participants, these clusters, produces these different letters. And so you can look at the major transitions between these different categories. And I can imagine that this also for Arthur's work might be a very nice benchmark test where we can categorize people in good and bad creative forager, and get an additional correlation between this production of different solutions and maybe better understand the ongoing search processes. Yeah, my last slide summarize these points a little bit and give you further hints. I think exploration and exploitation might be an interesting paradigm for also for problem solving and insight problem solving. I like the two terms because it goes, in my understanding, beyond blind variation and selection. That means it is not a blind trial and error process. There might be this productive and variational phases, but you have always the possibility to learn. Yeah, as you see from the last paradigm, you can learn which categories you already visited, which you already exploited. You do not restart again and again with the same categories. You can exploit these different categories and so on and so forth. I think that's important. There is learning possible when you look at exploration and exploitation. And of course, for us, the interesting question is, how is restructuring and exploration related? Is it the same? I think certainly not. Restructuring, in my understanding, provides more or less new patches for search, and exploration helps to find this searches, this patches. There might be a strong interplay, and that exploration, of course, increases the need for restructuring, and this might be interesting whether we can find the driving forces when exploration drives restructuring. Okay, so far I think I'm through, and yeah, I'm open to discussion and looking forward to your question and comments. And
Michael, thank you for interesting talk. We have some question. Jasmine had a question. Jasmine, please.
Hi, Mikhail. Yeah, thanks for your talk. I was very curious about what the talk would be about when I read Sergei's invitation on exploration and exploitation, because I started my whole research career with visual search. And so this was like, what does that have to do with insight problem solving? But you made a really good point, and I like this idea. It reminded me a little bit of what Bernard Hommel tried to do with the convergent and divergent thinking things, which he tried to induce with meditation. I think it worked so. It might work much better with visual search, but I also think that the search strategy is maybe personality dependent or more something which is individual. And I was wondering, when you explained Arthur's idea of priming a search strategy, I was wondering whether it would also be possible to just maybe assess the current search strategy or the predominant search strategy and then group participants according to that. Yeah, that would be one idea. And I was also wondering whether one would really be able to see much in compound remote associate items, maybe more when one would do something like ask participants to propose all candidate solutions to pronounce them out loud, so that we hear where they are currently searching. I think the alternative users task might be more interesting in that regard, because one could see more whether the search space is vast and whether they are switching a lot between close and remote associations, or whether they are doing clusters. I don't know, just some input, some ideas, maybe we can just discuss then.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to see you again after a long time.
Yeah.
We need Moscow to meet again. Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting input. I see your point. Of course, it would be worthwhile to have a paradigm where people can produce solutions. Yeah, because in this sense, we have more data and can have a closer look and categorize the data in a better way. I fully agree. I'm not so sure whether it is, at least at this modified idea, I don't know whether you'll be fully aware of Arthur's idea. Maybe he can say a few words on this after my
I don't know
comment.
much about his idea, actually. I heard about it now the first time.
Yeah,
it sounded a little bit like Maxi Becker's research, you know?
Yes, yes, it is closely related to Maxi Becker's research, at least coming from the stimuli domain. And
Yeah.
I was not sure whether I had his agreement to go in the full details.
Okay, so it's his turn.
I think it's on him to decide this. But I can imagine that also in this, basically we are interested coming from this spreading activation account. You can say spreading activation is more or less exploration in the system. Yeah, you have exploration in the system, and now the question is how to exploit and reduce the activation again so that you can converge to a solution. Yeah, and with pure spreading activation, in my understanding, this is impossible. Yeah, this is the idea. But Arthur, we're talking a lot about you. Would you kick in the discussion, or?
Yes. Yes, that was the idea of the research. Is that there cannot be a pure spreading activation when we search for a solution in compound remote associates, because because our search space would explode, as Michael wrote in his article. And now we are going to test whether the search in compound remote associates constraint, whether clues to compound remote associates constrain the search space, not make it wider, but make it narrower. And I think what Michael is talking about is the development of this idea that yes, I think it's sort of a next step in this research.
Okay, so do you want to manipulate like whether the prime is closely related to the solution gradually, like parametrically, like no search space constraint, no prime, prime that is similarly remote as the other triad words and the solution, and then closer and closer, or something like that?
Yes, we would like to use primes that are related to the solution and measure the level of activation of different semantic concepts by lexical decision task. If you want to, I think I could send you slides which I made for discussion with Michael and colleagues.
Yeah, sure. It's just because I collaborated recently with Maxi and we did an EG task with related and unrelated primes. I have not yet fully analyzed the EG data. Yeah, so I was curious about that.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and a further idea would be whether it is possible to prime again the search processes in a way, and whether this has some influence on the spreading activation and internal search process. But this is a very preliminary idea, but we can think about it.
Okay. Any question, please?
I have some question. Thank you very much for talk, Mikhail. My question are actually theoretical. And first of all, I'd like to clarify the content of the search. Because when we consider the nine-dot problem, we discuss the search of different moves. When we discuss the CRA problems, we talk about search of solution. And in the terms of problem space theory, we can differentiate, we can differ search of the new moves of the new mental operators, or the search of new states in the problem space theory. And it can be different types of search, maybe. So how and what maybe mechanisms do you consider when you talk about exploration and exploitation modes of the search? The search of new operators or the new states?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the exploration exploitation should hold for both. Yeah, but in the nine-dot problem, we would look for new states. Yeah, we have already the sufficient operators. This is hill climbing. Yeah, there is no other operator. But when we look for the matchstick arithmetic task, for example, you are completely right. That means you have to look for a new set of operators. Yeah, it is allowed to manipulate the operators of the equation and not the values. In both cases, I think we can find an exploration by these two processes. I think for the nine-dot problem, it's a little bit more naturally that you exploit new states within the search space. For the operators, it has more to do with the Go representation. I think you're right, that's more complicated. I think we have to think a little bit in more detail about this aspect.
And I'd like to clarify how can we choose the relevant level of the analysis of participants' behavior when we discuss different moves during problem-solving processes. Because if we can choose some relevant level, we can make a progress in this direction of an investigation. And if not, then not. So I don't know how, when we choose new problems, How can we define the level of the description for moves, different moves?
I think this, first of all, when you look at a new problem, what you have to do is to define the problem space, yeah, and to come up with the necessary operators. Yeah, you have always these two things: the problem space that allows you the different states of the problem, and the operators that help you to visit these different states. I think that's always the same. It is a problem in problems where we do not know what are the sufficient operators, and whether there are other states that we need to solve the problem. But in almost all insight problems that we use, we always have the problem state and we have the operators. And
Yeah,
therefore, I think...
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
I ask about it because when we investigate the 9-dot problem, they choose what kind of operators we can use to describe problem space. It's a very difficult problem. We need to choose the relevant parameters for different moves. Maybe direction, maybe the start point, maybe the length of these lines, maybe different others parameters, and it's very difficult to define what the set of these parameters is the best.
I see. That's something. That's something else. For me, an operator would be that you draw lines from one dot to another dot. This would be one thing. And a second operator or a second strategy would be that you cancel out with each line as much dots as possible. This would be the maximization criterion. I think what you mean is something else, namely people can do different things. They can show different actions from different dots with different acceleration, with different and so on and so forth.
Yes.
Yeah, that's much more complicated because you have a lot of degrees of freedom to draw lines. But again, I would suggest that you start with a number of predefined categories. For example, most often people start at the left upper dot and they draw lines to the right dot or to the to another dot. And then this would be the first description, and then you can find properties. That means how fast they connect dots, in which angle they connect dots, and so on and so forth. Yeah? That you have a set of possible moves, and you have a set of properties how this move can be executed.
Yes,
yeah?
We try to do it, and one of the most question and is about these properties. How can we test these properties that we make the right choice? Because we try to make our description of problem-solving processes more closer to the behavior of our participants in the experiments. And the participants, when they draw lines, at first we think as you that mental operators is the different lines.
The whole lines, Nikita
The
means.
whole, yes, whole lines. But when we see how actually participants draw these lines, we see that there are different stages. First of all, they choose the start point. Then they can choose direction for the line. Then they can choose the end point, or they can choose direction of the next line. And this description is more complicated and show us that problem space of the 9-dot problem can be structured not as different lines as mental operators, but in another way.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of level of description. When I agree that I'm interested in the lines, yeah, I have at this level no problem to come up with lines start at that point and at that point, and they mostly cancel out as much dots as possible. But at your level, at this micro level, yeah, you get a lot of degrees of freedom, and maybe it is worthwhile to start with the first line, yeah, and only analyze the first line and compare the lines and the behavior between the different participants and investigate how solvers differ from non-solvers. Yeah, whether the acceleration, for example, is different, or the look-ahead value of participants is different when they draw the first two lines, for example. For our discussion, it would be interesting, yeah, when we come back to this exploration, exploitation notion. Is there a change between different trials in a single person? Or is he or she always doing the same acceleration? Yeah. And is it possible to look at the variation between these single trials and predict whether a participant becomes a solver or at least draws lines to non-dot points or not? I think this would be interesting, whether you find variation in the sense that we can go back to this exploration, exploitation thing, because strategy change could also be something that we see at this micro level. Yeah?
We try to test this hypothesis with Vladimir. We have a common project with programists in which we differ different types of the lines, and we try to test some hypotheses about change of the frequency of different types of the lines on the different stage during problem solving in the 9-dot problem.
Yeah, I think this already goes in the right direction. I'm a little bit worried about that, that your level of detail produces so much possibilities to analyze the different things, that you should start with a very, very easy first approach, and then after a while come up with more models that enrich more or less your data set, if necessary. Yeah, maybe the first acceleration of the line tell you all the entire story of the problem solving process.
Okay.
Could be.
Okay.
Yeah, we agree.
Michael, I have a very short question.
Mhm.
If I understood correctly, your idea involves multiple insights in the problem-solving process. Am I right?
Mhm. There could be multiple insights. Yeah. For example, for the 9-dot problem, I always claiming that there are at least 3 insights. Yeah.
Mhm.
The first insight is that my first strategy lead me into an impasse, and this realization might be the first minor insight. The second insight and the major insight of the 9-dot problem might be I have to draw lines outside the given 9 dots. Yeah? But the problem isn't solved with this information. We know giving people the hint you are allowed to draw lines outside the 9 dots is not sufficient to solve the problem. Because the third insight might be that I come up with a heuristic that restrict the even larger search space. Yeah, this would be the third insight, if I would call it insight. Yeah. And again, coming back to this exploitation thing, I think we often start with exploiting prior knowledge approaches. And then the important thing that distinguish the successful solver from the unsuccessful one is to realize there is something wrong with my strategy, to seize the problem-solving processes. And I think this would be the perfect moment to trigger an exploration phase, whatever that means. Yeah. And here things becoming complicated because pure exploration, what does this mean for the 9-dot problem? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Any question, please?
Yes, I have 2 short questions.
You are welcome.
My first very silly question is about last study of Hart and colleagues. Well, why is this about foraging, creative foraging? I didn't see any food in this stimulus.
Yeah, that's a good question. It is that the foraging term is more or less bound to exploration and exploitation, and it is more or less a creative search for food in a sense. You search for new fields of food. But
Okay.
I fully agree. In the literally, it is hard to understand.
Good. And the second question, I like the idea that exploration and exploitation could be used to describe the problem-solving processes, but the question is, to my mind, is very these terms are very general. When we describe visual search, we describe the 2 different strategies within the initial representation. So we see all letters on our screen, and we can switch between 2 different types of strategies to find the target. When we talk about problem solving and representational change, we can describe it as 2 different stages. One stage is about the search for a solution within initial representation, and like exploration is a search for a new representation. But I think that we can apply these 2 different strategies both to initial representation and to search for a solution within initial representation, and to find a new representation.
Mhm.
What do you think? What are the bounds of applicability of this idea?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think at the first approach, it is very sexy to use these terms because they seem so easy and can easily explain a complicated dynamic of search processes. And I fully agree with your idea that also within the initial search, you can have both. Yeah, first exploring for operators or for search spaces that might be most helpful to solve the problem, and then always exploiting the different operators or search spaces that you select. Yeah. But I find it still helpful to go out from this set of problem solving as we understand problem solving. There is the search, then you have a representational change, and so on and so forth, because we have always problems to say something about the internal processes. This is the first problem. And the second thing, we have no idea when one thing starts, ends, and what are the driving forces to go into the other phase. And at least heuristically, for me, it's quite helpful to think about these thresholds. What is a threshold to go from exploration into exploitation and vice versa? You know? Whether these are the right terms is another question. We have a lot of other things like generation and selection. Is it the same? Yeah, I generate a search space and then I select candidate solutions, then I fail, then I generate a new set of solutions. We have, as Yasmin said, convergent, divergent thinking. This might be something else. Yeah, divergent thinking, I produce a number of opportunities. Yeah, again, producing, generating, and converging. I select maybe a main line of argumentation or problem solving, and then I try and validate whether this leads me in the right direction and solve the problem. Yeah. For me, the most interesting thing is what might be the inner reward system to come from one process into the other. Yeah. And if it is possible, if you understood this in more detail, to help problem solvers and foster problem solving in a way that we give them the cues or the information, the helpful information at the right moment. Now exploitation is over, you have to go into an exploration phase. Yeah.
Thank you.
And from this point of view, this meta level, exploration, exploitation, more a bird's eye view, might be at least helpful.
But my question was about what is the content of the exploration. On the one level, you can try to find a solution within your initial representation. And you can change your mind and try to use exploration to find a new representation. In this case, we speak about two different kinds of exploration or about the same exploration.
Yeah, I think from the notion of exploration, exploitation, we speak of the same. But within problem solving, it should be different. because in the later you need representational change. Yeah, and as I said before, I don't think that representational change is the same as exploration. No?
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure whether I would agree with that. I think it's a very difficult question indeed, because I mean, the exploration has also a lot to do with, for example, if you have visual search, then it's very constrictive where you can search. We know all the search spaces. We have a very good overview over that. But in our minds, when we do problem solving, the search spaces, I mean, even if it is restricted by ourselves and we then turn to another search space, for example, due to representational change, and that is the true exploration. It is very difficult to say when that happens, actually, like when you cross the border of what you previously deemed in your search space and what you then look at. And I think also this relates to Nikita's question. It's always the question about how do we make things measurable? And I was also thinking about, you talked a lot about the 9-dot problem, but I was still stuck with the compound remote associate tasks. And there is this very nice measure of the cosine distance between words that also Maxi used. And yes. One could also use this metric measure to just measure the steps that people jump from one word to the next to make it better measurable, whether this is a huge step in or a huge jump or a short jump, a short semantic distance. And maybe one could use this to, for example, say there is a cutoff between whether you actually search still in the vicinity of where you previously looked, or whether you do a true jump to a completely different search space, and whether this is true exploration.
Yeah, I think that's very, very interesting in the semantic domain, that you come up with a criterion. What is exploration? Is exploration really semantic distance or determined by semantic distance? Or is exploration something that has to do, I jump from one category in another, from animals into tools or something else? But as you see, I think it is worthwhile to think about this differences.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
It's extremely inspiring to talk to you guys, and we should continue this line of exploration, exploitation, and research. Maybe come up with an interesting paradigm, or maybe not. Let us.
We will definitely come up with interesting paradigms, I guess. And maybe at some point we will also have some kind of operationalization that most of us can agree upon.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any question, colleagues? No. So I should say many thanks for Mikhail for his today talk, and I hope we will have a chance to continue our discussion about exploration, exploitation, and our different projects. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of us.
Yeah, thank you, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Bye. Bye.
Stay well.
Bye, Mikhail, and thank you.
Bye.